The Echoes of the Eye DLC for Outer Wilds takes a notable departure from the setting of the base game. Instead of telling a story spread across multiple tiny planets in a miniature solar system, its story is almost entirely contained within a massive cloaked Ringworld of alien origin. In this video, I'm going to look at the various technologies present on this ship, the Stranger, and rank them on a tier list based on how quote-unquote realistic they are, and then use that to get a final score for the realism of the Stranger itself so that I can compare it to the realism of the planets that I ranked previously. Before we do that, let's get two things out of the way. One, Outer Wilds is a game about discovering the secrets of a handcrafted solar system, some of which I will now spoil. So if you have not played the game before and are considering it, you should shut the video off now. Two, all of these technologies could just be brushed off as this is alien technology beyond our comprehension, so we cannot say if it's realistic or not. To avoid that, I'm going to focus on comparing these things to known technologies and known natural phenomena where possible, and use that as a basis for the ranking. Cloaking. The first thing we notice about the Stranger is that, well, it's invisible. The Ringworld possesses a cloaking device which hides it from all directions unless we view it as it eclipses the sun, where the cloak breaks down and we instead see an ominous shadow being cast. I can think of two scientific explanations for this cloaking device. The first one is the most sci-fi. The ship possesses some ability to warp space-time in a bubble around itself so that light coming from behind it goes perfectly around it as if it weren't there, making it seem entirely invisible. Think of some sort of harnessed gravitational lensing effect. Such a technology would also explain why it's able to float motionless above the sun, seemingly unaffected by its gravity. It may also explain why if you fly full speed towards the Stranger, it suddenly slows you down as you enter the cloaking field. However, this does not explain why the cloak breaks down when the ship eclipses the sun, and is inconsistent with some other points we're going to look at in the future, so let's put a pin in this for later. The second explanation that I am more in favor of is an active camouflage system. This is something we see in the real world in certain animal species and military technologies, where the appearance of an object adapts in real time to keep it hidden. For the Stranger, this might be done by recording what's behind it and then projecting that image in front of itself to make it seem like it isn't there. This technology is consistent with what we see inside the Stranger, where they have these massive 3D screens that show a perfect recreation of what's outside. The way the game makes this work is that these are literally just windows with this neat pixel texture overlay to make it appear like a screen. It also somewhat matches the behavior we see when the station eclipses the sun. It could be that here the sun is simply too bright for it to match with active camouflage, and the system instead shorts out, leaving us with a dark shadow. While I think there is a pretty sound real-world basis for this technology, the implementation of it is just a bit too far-fetched for me to give this too high of a ranking though. No real-world active camouflage system is able to perfectly produce a 3D image from all possible angles for multiple observers all at once, which the Stranger would need to have in order to remain undetected by two different alien civilizations over the course of thousands of years. In the end, I'm going to give this element C tier. Centrifugal gravity. The Stranger has artificial gravity created through centrifugal acceleration due to it constantly spinning. This is probably the most realistic thing we're going to see here. Real-life space agencies have prototyped rotating artificial gravity in space before, and I feel like if the need and the funding was there, I think humanity would be able to build a space station with artificial rotating gravity within like a few decades. Again, with huge emphasis on need and funding. So that's it. Case closed. Easy S tier, right? Wrong. The centrifugal gravity is fake. The Stranger does not rotate fast enough for the player to experience 1G when standing inside it. You can see this at a certain point in the game where you approach a hull breach on the outside of the Stranger. As you fly your ship up, you can 100% feel gravity just suddenly kick in and pull you down, which is not how rotational, centrifugal gravity would ever work. Of course, I don't think we're meant to take this literally. In the universe of the game, I believe this is 100% meant to just be rotational, artificial gravity, and the game just cheats a bit to make the gameplay feel better and stop it being super difficult to land on the station. For reference, to actually achieve the artificial gravity seen in-game, it would have to spin this quickly. It's still possible to land on, but it's definitely a bit more difficult and could pose a problem for some players. Unless, I don't know, maybe the fake artificial gravity is meant by the developers to be real, and it just spins for vibes. These aliens just decided in universe to make their ship spin because it looks cool, and actually they do have sci-fi gravitational technology. I don't know. Put a pin in that for later. So for that, I'm gonna have to give it an A tier. I've dropped it down from S just because, it is technically cheated, but the technology itself is entirely plausible. Solar sails. Much like centrifugal gravity, solar sails are a real thing in the real world and have been successfully used in real-life space mission. In this case, there was the Icarus mission by JAXA, the Japanese space agency, which flew to Venus while propelled by light from the sun. So surely another easy S tier, right? Well, again, not necessarily. Icarus was a relatively small 55 kilogram satellite with the mission of demonstrating the possibility of solar-powered propulsion in space. It is by no means a massive alien spaceship capable of interstellar travel. That interstellar part is a big issue here. As the Stranger travels away from the nearest star, the amount of light it receives from that star drops off with the inverse square of the distance to the star. Simply put, when it is twice as far from the sun, it receives a quarter of the initial light and therefore a quarter of the initial thrust. So when the Stranger unfurls its sails in-game, it starts accelerating away from the sun at 0.2 meters per second squared in order to escape the supernova. Let's plug in some real numbers and do some math and see how viable this acceleration is. First, we need the mass of the Stranger. If we approximate it as a cylindrical shell made of pure iron, that's 700 meters wide, 350 meters deep, with walls, let's say 1 meter thick, we get a mass of about 10 billion kilograms. And let's just double that to account for all the water and dirt and whatnot that's on the inside, call it 20 billion kilograms. What kind of force do we need to accelerate an object of that mass at 0.2 meters per second squared? So okay, the superstructure now surrounding the Stranger is about 1 kilometer wide, so let's approximate the solar sails as just a square that is 1 kilometer in width, or 1 million meters squared. According to Wikipedia, assuming a solar sail with perfect reflectance of light positioned 1 astronomical unit away from our sun, the craft would experience 9.08 micronewtons of force per square meter of sail. Multiplied by our 1 million square meters and divided by our 20 billion kilograms of mass, that is 5 times 10 to the power of -7 meters per second squared. That is on the order of micrometers. That is nothing. It is entirely impossible, in my view, for the Stranger to be propelled interstellar distances by solar radiation. It just doesn't work. Also, this doesn't account for the fact that the gravity of the sun should be pulling the Stranger down towards it, but instead it just floats here motionlessly, but we'll put another pin in that for later. Okay, but what if we go super sci-fi? Solar radiation pressure at 1 astronomical unit is about 1,000 watts per meter squared. So if we take that amount multiplied by the size of our sails and look at the amount of energy that is hitting the sails over 1 second, that is 1 billion joules. And let's say that literally 100% of that energy is converted directly into kinetic energy to move the ship. This would give us a velocity of 0.3 meters per second. That kind of works. You just have to ignore that this is 100% not how solar sails work at all, and also the acceleration still falls off with the square of the distance. But if you ignore all the reasons why it doesn't work, then it works. I'll give it C tier. It's based on a real-life technology and just requires, frankly, magical levels of alien technology and converting light directly into pure kinetic energy to achieve. But, I think in principle it's kind of there. The river. Part of why the Stranger requires absurd levels of energy to move is because it's hauling around like 1 million tons of water. For this next point, how come the river's flowing? I've seen a lot of people say that this is because as the Stranger itself rotates, the water stays where it was. So from your perspective standing on the shore of the river, it just appears like the river is flowing backwards. However, in hydrodynamics, there's this concept of the no-slip condition, which states that a viscous fluid that is in contact with a solid surface must have the same velocity as that surface at that contact point. That is to say, it can't slip. Water is of course a viscous fluid, meaning that it would get pulled along with the bottom of the river because of the no-slip condition, and its viscosity would sort of dissipate that movement from the boundary throughout the rest of the fluid and cause the entire river to move along with the stranger. Also, according to Wikipedia, this condition should hold unless the river is made of mayonnaise or melted cheese. So thank you for that, Wikipedia. I love you, Wikipedia. So from this we'd conclude that the river shouldn't flow, but it's flowing. Of course, this is only the case for an uninterrupted river circling the Ringworld, but here we actually have a massive dam pooling water into a reservoir. Normally, a dam takes the kinetic energy of running water and harnesses it to, say, create electricity. But that makes no sense here because they actually need to expend energy to cause the river to flow in the first place, so they certainly couldn't take any energy out of it. We can also safely pass through the grates of the dam without running through any, massive spinning turbines, so I think it's pretty clear that this is not meant to be a dam that is extracting energy from the river at all. So then what is it? And what's the point of the reservoir? My best guess is that these big red radiator things somehow power the flow of water up into the reservoir to fill it. As you pass through them, you can actually see that the water level becomes slanted and starts going up to bring you level with the reservoir in a way that doesn't really make any physical sense. And then once the water is in that reservoir, it's, slowly released from the dam, which turns all its potential energy into kinetic energy and causes it to flow all the way back around where, in theory, these big red radiator things get it moving again. And then what about at the midpoint through the loop when the dam collapses? If the dam is what was, powering the flowing river, surely after this it would stop. Which I suppose it would. However, that might take longer than the 7 or so minutes left in the time loop, so we would never get to see that anyway. So in the end, I'm going to give this B tier. In the absence of external forces, we don't expect the river to flow like this. And while these radiators that somehow seem to change the water level might be what's causing this, there's no explanation into how they actually do it. Orbital mechanics. So the most notable thing about the orbital mechanics of the Stranger is that there are no orbital mechanics. It just floats above the plane of the solar system unmoving until it unfurls its solar sails and flies away. Gravity has come up a few times here. It's time to unpin all those pins that I mentioned. We listed gravitational manipulation technology as a potential explanation for the cloaking field, but then we also have the realistic artificial gravity implemented through rotation, although technically cheated by the developers. And we have the Stranger just sort of hovering motionless above the sun, unaffected by gravity instead of being in orbit, so its solar sails don't have to overcome any gravitational force when they unfurl to propel it away. If the Stranger did cloak itself by warping space, then it would make sense for it to be able to just kind of float here without orbiting. Again, by bending space-time in some sort of Star Trek-y sci-fi way. But we already talked about how active camouflage is seemingly a much more likely explanation, with it breaking when the sun is behind it. I don't see how bending space would break because there was a bright light. And then also, as previously mentioned, they don't use any super sci-fi artificial gravity technology when actually inside the ship, unless we are to take the cheated gravity the devs implemented for gameplay purposes as real in universe. And if they're able to make the ship just float over the sun, why do they need solar sails for propulsion? Couldn't this technology also be applied for that purpose, to move the ship itself? So that was confusing. There are a lot of apparent contradictions here. What feels the most consistent to me is the idea that the Stranger is able to create artificial zero gravity in some way that keeps it stable relative to a star through some super advanced sci-fi process, but isn't able to use this technology to make artificial gravity, so it needs to spin, and it's not able to actually propel itself with this technology, so it needs the solar sails. That said, this is really just an endless rabbit hole of theory crafting with no real foundational basis to rest on. I've tried my best to avoid this for the other elements, but here I have to say that this is just magical, unexplained alien technology beyond our comprehension, where they're able to just float here motionlessly but still need those other seemingly contradictory things for reasons, and hit it with the F tier for realism. Overall ranking. So in the end, what ranking do we give the Ringworld compared to the other planets in Outer Wilds? Taking the average of what I've said so far, overall it's about a C ranking, but I'm going to bump it up a grade to B because comparing it to the planets, its realism has a lower burden of proof because it was just built by intelligent creatures rather than needing to be some natural thing that just happened. So to an extent, a lot of these things can be explained as, well, they just made it that way. This puts it on par with the B-tier planets, which mostly just consisted of things that are basically just real in real life, but with a bunch of quirks, like the Earth, but it has no core, or a sub-Neptune-like water world exoplanet, but it's got floating islands. For the planet ranking, you can check out my video I did on that, the results of which I have now just spoiled to you. Oops. The point being, there are a lot of nitpicks, some things which feel contradictory, or elements that are likely intended only for gameplay and not for in-universe lore purposes, but overall, the Ringworld feels plausible. Well, that's the video, and hold up. I've been calling this thing a Ringworld this entire time. It's called Ringworld in the game's internal code. It's probably called a Ringworld in the ship's logs. I feel like we all agree that this thing is a Ringworld, but this isn't a Ringworld. It's a cylinder. It's a cylinder. This is just an O'Neill cylinder. It's not a ring. Like, only the sails are on a kind of a ring shape. It's not a Ringworld at all. F tier. You lied to me, the stranger. You lied to me. Anyway, hope you found this unnecessarily detailed look at the stranger interesting. Like always with this type of video, I'll have a corrections comment pinned in the description if there was anything I got wrong or could have elaborated on more, so if you noticed anything, please let me know in a comment. And again, much like with my Outer Wilds Planet Realism video, none of this is like bad or a value judgment in any way. Actually, I think it's quite good that the game devs prioritized good gameplay and interesting level design over realism in the game where you fly a wooden spaceship between tiny planets and where being within 2 meters of a tree lets you breathe on the moon. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more of whatever this was. Okay, bye.